the perfect Buddha, the best of all teachers, who taught that that which arises through dependent relationship is without cessation, without arising, without annihilation, without permanence, without coming, without going, without distinction, without identity, and peaceful, free from elaborations. Homage to Gautama, who moved by his compassion toward the sacred Dharma, to rid us of all misconceived views. So all sentient beings across the expanse of the space in general, and particularly the beings of this world, and specifically the human beings of this earth, who have the quality of language, the attributes of language and understanding. So the animals, of course, feed and prey on other animals when they are hungry, and whereas human beings do all kinds of wrongdoings. I once visited a zoo in Hyderabad, and I saw in some corner of an area there were a few tigers, and on the other corner of the same area there were some deers. So there was no barrier between these animals. And the people taking care of the zoo I asked them, are these deers not at risk? And they said that when the lions were fed, well, then they do not hunt and prey on the deers. And so these animals, the predators, do not harm other animals when they have their fill. Whereas we human beings, we indulge in mobilized wars and kill each other with weapons, and so such a killing to such a great length and scope is done by human beings alone and not others. And so for thousands of years there has been wars and battles that are fought and that have been fought in human society. So although we have made progress in educational field, in terms of our intellect, we may have made some progress. In my own life, for example, I was born in 1935, and at that time, there was the Sino-Japanese War was about to happen, and then in the West, in Europe, the Second World War was about to start. And then since my birth, there have been lots of wars that were fought around the world. And in those days, there were very few who talked about peace in the world. But in the later part of the 20th century and mid-20th century and later part of the century, then people began to talk about peace in the world. And there have been people who organized demonstrations against the war. And so from our own experience, many people have felt that violence is not at all good for anybody, whether it's in Europe or Asia, Japan, and so forth. I have had discussions with the people. Japan suffered 2 atomic bombings, but the Japanese do not have any kind of dissent and grudge against the Americans today. And then Germany also was destroyed through bombings. So I did not witness that kind of a sense of grudge and dissent within the Japanese people. And so that shows some progress within our mind as well. And so in the 60s, when I visited Singapore, I've been there a couple of times, and I met some Chinese monks, and they recited the Heart Sutra in Chinese. And as I was listening, I really felt sad. This recitation of the Heart Sutra in Chinese, I felt that it gradually could be revived in China, mainland China as well. And in Singapore at that time, the Chinese recited the Heart Sutra, whereas in the mainland China, there was lots of difficulties. But things changed over the years since then. And today, there is huge followers of Buddhism in China, 400 million today. And there are many people taking interest in the teaching of the Buddha. And then in places which did not used to be traditionally Buddhist countries, and even amongst modern scientists, there are people taking interest in Buddhism. So times have changed. So in the non-Buddhist countries, it's more suitable for people to keep to their own traditional religion, and because conversion to another religion is quite complicated. Of course, from amongst the millions of people, there may be few who have a special inclination to the teaching of the Buddha and Asian religions, and that's a different case. And then the Chinese are traditionally Buddhists. So although there have been great material development, people seek peace of mind on the basis of religion, and particularly with regard to Buddhism, by understanding the workings and system of our mind and emotion, we as Buddhists should find peace. And this tradition that we have, the Buddhist tradition, is something that could contribute and benefit the world. And I feel fortunate to have this opportunity to teach the Chinese audience this time. And the Chinese, China today is the most populated country in the world. And I hope that there could be peace in the world by making internal change within ourselves, in China as well, so that, of course, Buddhism was destroyed in China proper also, but people have not been able to bring peace of mind. So apart from if there had been some other tradition which could have brought some peace of mind after destroying Buddhism, I mean, we could have used that, but there has not been anything. So the Chinese in mainland China, and also those in Taiwan, of course, you have those in Taiwan have freedom, and therefore, with regard to the teaching of the Buddha, you could make some contribution. You have the opportunity to revive the teaching of the Buddha. Let's have tea first. The qualities of the Buddha are inconceivable. The qualities of the Dharma are inconceivable. The Sangha are inconceivable. I'm being offering to the three inconceivable ones, which has inconceivable benefit. 정화물에 sweet tea. Oh. Looks like some people on the right side of the temple and did not get tea. Mi cortando. Got it. He's on saying the two abbots are very thin, so take more bread. So then, today we'll, of course, we'll not be able to finish the text, so I'll first go through the Praise for Dependent Origination by Master Tsongkhapa. So I've taught it, mentioned it earlier. So it was written by Tsongkhapa, who was a great master, both learned and experienced, a realized master. So in the earlier part of his life, regarding the emptiness, the view of emptiness, as I said, he said, although things do not have any intrinsic existence, even to the subtlest particle, there's not even a particle of inherent existence, yet they do exist as renowned to others. So the infallibility of independent origination and the non-assertion of, non-assertability of the emptiness, when they are seen separately, as separate, unrelated, then you are actually not able to bring the understanding of emptiness as meaning that things are dependently originated. But later, Tsongkhapa also wrote in their text, when you do not have to alternate between these two, but you see that emptiness and the dependent origination are actually compatible with each other without contradiction, then you have completed the analysis into emptiness. And so when you say that things do not have any inherent existence, that should mean or give rise to this understanding that things are dependently originated. Because things are none other than being dependent on others, yet they do appear to one as if they have some objective in an independent existence. And from your own understanding, you are able to say that that's not the way things exist. And therefore, things are dependently originated. When you see that because things are without any inherent existence, therefore, it's feasible to say that, it's tenable to say that they are dependently originated. And therefore, dependent origination, the appearance, does away with that of the extreme of nihilism, and the emptiness does away with the extreme of permanence in things. And so this life account of Tsongkhapa has its own significance, because when he was in Gadong, the great sacred place of Gadong, he had a vision of Manjushri. Lama Umapa, one of masters or teachers of Tsongkhapa, was someone who had a vision, pure vision of Manjushri, even as a child when he was a shepherd. So Lama Umapa had visions of Manjushri regularly. And Rinpoche received teachings and instructions from him. And he asked questions to Manjushri through Lama Umapa. But later in Gadong, the sacred site, he saw a blue light within which he saw Manjushri. And so from then on, he was able to see Manjushri constantly. And so, to Manjushri, he asked questions about the scriptures, and particularly the Madhyamaka view. And Manjushri gave him a short instruction, and Tsongkhapa said that he couldn't comprehend the meaning, and Manjushri advised him to read more books and then do meditation. And so what this shows is, and so that you will be able to understand what I have said. So what this shows is that it's not the case that as soon as you have some vision of a deity, you could have, there is an upsurge of realization within you. That's not the case. And so as I mentioned the other day, the Buddhas do not move their own or transpose their own realization into others, but by showing the reality of suchness, they lead beings to liberation. Therefore, what this shows is that we need to go through the processes of learning, reflection, and meditation in order to develop experience of the Dharma. And so that's how we go about with the practice of the Dharma. And Rinpoche himself went through this process. And in the praise to Bodhisattva Sadaprarudita, all the Bodhisattva are crying all the time. It's mentioned that in the story of this Bodhisattva, it's mentioned that just by having some vision of a deity, you will not have the realizations developed within yourself. So you need to meet with the guru, the teacher, spiritual master, with whom you have some karmic connection. Of course, by relying on Manjushri, reciting his prayers and mantras, and of course it's beneficial to develop our intelligence. And so by learning, doing studies, of course, we could develop the 4 types of intelligence and wisdom, such as the extensive, the vast intelligence, and swift and clear intelligence. And then Rinpoche also, Tsongkhapa had a vision of Master Nagarjuna and his 5 disciples. And from amongst these disciples, in the vision, it said that Tsongkhapa was touched by a text in his hand by Buddha Palitha. And therefore, he was able to also have some realization of the Madhyamaka view of emptiness deeply. So the deities and so forth could be like a condition for us to develop our wisdom further. So when you gain this kind of understanding and insight into the teaching of dependent origination, Tsongkhapa wrote finally this text, in praise of the Buddha for teaching the dependent origination. So Namo Guru Manju Ghoshaya, this salutation line. So in my text, there is the verses of salutation from Buddhist Master Nagarjuna's Mula Madhyamaka Karika, which is not needed. So those are the 2 verses of salutation from Mula Madhyamaka Karika by Nagarjuna. Now, the text by Tsongkhapa, he who speaks on the basis of seeing, this makes him knower and teacher unexcelled. I bow to you, O conqueror, you who saw dependent origination and taught it. So by going through the process of learning, reflection and meditation, and eventually gaining insight into the true intent of the Buddha, true intent, so seeing. So the Buddha, having acquainted over many eons, and having trained himself, and then became enlightened. So such a great being who sees, who has seen and practiced himself, and then as a result attained the state whereby he is able to fulfill the interest of both self and others, and therefore taught others. So he who speaks on the basis of seeing, this makes him knower and teacher unexcelled. So the basis for that, becoming an unexcelled knower and teacher, is that of seeing dependent origination. I bow to you, O conqueror, you who saw dependent origination and taught it. And then with regard to dependent origination and emptiness. So I usually use the term dependent origination, the reality of dependent origination. Why is it so important? Where does the significance of its importance lie? Wherever degeneration there are in this world, the root of all this is ignorance. You taught that it is dependent origination, the seeing of which will undo this ignorance. So all of us want happiness, and our suffering, which we don't want, also have come through its causes. And that is the unruly mind that is within ourselves. And there are so many negative emotions within ourselves. And what are all these disturbing emotions rooted in? They are rooted in the lack of our understanding of true how things actually are. Of course, with the help of love and compassion, we may be able to do away with some kind of some form of negative emotions. And love and compassion could go together also with that of the grasping a true existence. But the grasping a true existence is not necessary for love and compassion to arise as an associating factor for them. So these positive, constructive states of mind, love, compassion, and so forth, can be developed on the basis of reason through which we can gain conviction. As our conviction develops, they could develop further and further, love and compassion, whereas jealousy and anger and so forth, these are caused by distorted states of mind. And also, as I mentioned yesterday, they could also be associated together with that of this kind of distorted states of mind. And therefore, we can see that they do not have a valid support from authoritative cognition. And therefore, they could be overcome, whereas love and compassion can be developed further and further infinitely, because they have valid support and from valid knowledge. So whereas the anger and so forth cannot develop infinitely because they do not have the support of valid knowledge. Mind itself is without any intrinsic existence, because that is the very nature of the mind itself. Therefore, we can develop this the awareness further and further, whereas ignorance cannot infinitely increase, because it's not within the intrinsic nature of the mind itself. So negative emotions have powerful antidotes against them, whereas the constructive states of mind do not have any antidote that counters them and eliminates them. So because of ignorance arising within us, our mind becomes afflicted with afflictive emotions, whereas love and compassion, the positive states of mind, and our mind becomes positive as well. And therefore, the root of our suffering, misery and so forth, is ignorance. Therefore, the second verse, whatever degeneration there is in the world, the root of all this is ignorance. So such an ignorance, which is confused about the reality of how things are, and because of that, its antidote is that awareness which sees the reality, and therefore it sees what the ignorance perceives is totally distorted. And therefore you taught that it is dependent origination, the seeing of which will undo the ignorance. So Rinpoche here does not mention that of the selflessness, view of selflessness or emptiness as such, because these are also asserted by the other schools of tenet within Buddhism. such as Vaibhashikas and Tantrikas and so forth. And then there are also the philosophical schools within Buddhism who also assert selflessness of phenomena as well. And even with regard to non-Buddhist traditions, they do talk about the two truths. So I know a Christian priest who is a very sincere practitioner and a staunch supporter of the Tibetan course. So from his explanation, even from the Christianity point of view, there is some understanding of emptiness, because we as individuals are a tiny part of this whole universe, this huge universe that God has created from their point of view. So when you think that you are just a tiny part of this whole universe, the creation of God, and it could help to reduce our egoistic attitude. And therefore, in one nunnery, a Christian nunnery, I had a meeting with the nuns, and one of the nuns asked me, when we have ego, a strong sense of ego and arrogance, I mean, how do we counter it? And I told her that a Buddhist practitioner would meditate on emptiness, but this is not relevant to you. But for you, you have this view that understanding that the whole world is created by God. The world and the beings living in it were created by God. And you are just a tiny part of this creation. And if you so thinking along this line, this sense of an I, which appears so big, will actually be seen as small. So I had some understanding or idea of what my Christian priest friend had said with regard to the emptying oneself. And so here, Rinpoche mentions dependent origination. When you understand things are dependently originated, you will also be able to see the union or the combination of appearance and empty nature of things. And so with regard to dependent origination, the union of appearance and emptiness, when you talk about appearance, it's the mere designation. And that is also related to the dependence in terms of how the whole is dependent on its parts, and also that of the law of causality, dependence in terms of these two as well. And so when you are able to understand that things are dependent originated, then you'll be able to see that of the suffering, the true suffering, and the pervasive existential suffering, and also the origin of suffering, and then that when you are able to see also that this ignorance is the root of all suffering, and therefore when you see that this can be overcome, you'll also see the possibility of cessation, and for that you'll also come to understand that the true path is its course. And mainly, of course, of all the different aspects of the path, it is this path which realizes how things actually exist. And therefore, when you understand dependent origination, you'll be able to understand the Four Noble Truths. And then the exaggerated kind of rumination that we have. So in the Mulammadkarika, it says that seeing something as attractive or unattractive due to exaggerated way of looking at them, those of the attachment and anger arise within yourself. This is given as a reason And so here, dependent origination, seeing which will undo ignorance, refers to the subtle dependent nature of things. So how can an intelligent person, so someone who is intelligent, for example, when we have some election, political election, we have to know what kind of qualities that person whom we are going to elect has. And in order to have some efficiency and so forth, the person also must be intelligent. Sometimes it's not so sure which kind of person we choose in elections. So how can an intelligent person not comprehend that this path of dependent origination is the essential point of your teaching? So of course the Buddha has given so many different teachings, but a teaching which has not been taught by any other founding teachers of the religious traditions, and which could also be explained through reason, is the dependent origination the Buddha taught, this essential point of your teaching. This being so, who will find, O Savior, a more wonderful way to praise you than to praise you for having taught that origination through dependence? And regarding dependent origination, whatsoever depends on conditions, that is devoid of intrinsic existence. What excellent instruction can there be more amazing than this proclamation? And in a sutra, it is said that that which is dependent on conditions has no birth, and there's no birth in its nature. So it's empty of any essential existence. And so with regard to the meaning of emptiness, are these texts written just to show off their scholarship and their originality? But the teaching on emptiness is given that because if you understand it, you will be hateful. So whatsoever depends on conditions, that is devoid of intrinsic nature. What excellent instruction can there be more amazing than this proclamation? This has significance because we are not just saying that things do not exist the way they appear, because we cannot find them when we search for the designated object. Although things do exist because they affect us, yet they cannot be found when we search for their identity. So when we are able to draw the conviction within ourselves that things have no essential intrinsic existence because they are dependently originated, then you'll be able to see the significance of dependence in terms of emptiness and vice versa. By grasping at it, the childish strengthen bondage to extreme views. For the wise, the very fact is the door to cut free from this net of elaborations. So, although we say that things are merely conceptually imputed, yet it doesn't mean that we cannot think of anything and they can exist in any way that they can exist. But things have their causes and conditions, and then they have their own identity. So these are undeniably there. That of law of causality. And therefore, there are philosophical schools which say that there must be a cause which has its own, which exists by way of its own characteristics, and then similarly with regard to the effect and the identity, and these must be the case, that they must have self-characterized. And then we counter this by saying that the effect depends on its causes. Because there is something which helps to bring about the result, there is a result. And therefore, there is a cause in dependence on what it brings about, the result. And therefore, the result is dependent on the cause. And then, because of the result, you can say there is a cause, and therefore a cause cannot exist apart from its relation to the result as such. And so not only saying that the results depend on its cause, their causes, but the causes also are dependent on their results, although the result is not there yet when the cause existed. So we can talk about this dependence of the cause on its results in terms of how it's conceptually designated. And therefore, we can see how that can lead us to understand that things have no essential existence. And so, the dependent in terms of causality shows that things are mutually dependent and there's nothing which is independent of other factors. Since this teaching is not seen elsewhere, you alone are the teacher, like calling a fox a lion for a tirthika, non-Buddhist, it would be a word of flattery. Wondrous teacher. So because of showing the path to the unmistaken path to the liberation, he's called wondrous teacher, and showing it from his own experience, his wondrous refuge. And because of helping wanderers, and he is the wondrous speaker, and because of bringing that of the liberation and for the sentient beings to their liberation and so forth, he's called this wondrous savior. So because of seeing that things have no essential existence, because they are dependently originated. So I pay homage to this teacher who taught well dependent origination to help heal sentient beings. O benefactor, you have taught the peerless reason to ascertain emptiness, the heart of the teaching. So this verse I recite when I do the practice of taking refuge. So we usually talk about whom we take refuge in and the causes for taking refuge and so forth. How we take refuge in and so forth. And so if we use our intellect, and if we can, then we could use this kind of... so I use... the first verse, which says, he who speaks on the basis of seeing, and so forth, and then also a wondrous teacher, wondrous refuge, and so forth. So on a daily basis, I recite these. So there was a question yesterday about what do we have to develop experience of, the teachings pertaining to beings of small and intermediate scope in order to gain insight into emptiness. So in the 400 verses, the Arya Deva says that someone who doubts about the teaching of the Buddha, such a person is not a Buddhist, and he or she doesn't take refuge in the three jewels. So if there's somebody who says, oh, you cannot practice this because it's religion, then you could actually share the teaching of dependent origination. And from my own experience, I have seen that dependent origination, when I talk about dependent origination, even the scientists take interest. And the quantum physics concludes that through their experiment and research, they conclude that things have no objective existence. Like the Chittamatras say that things have no external existence. Whereas the Madhyamakas say that both the external things and the internal world of mind, cognitions and so forth, are also merely in name. So we don't have to say that like Chittamatras saying that the external things do not exist, but then the internal world of mind, cognition, exists truly. But we could refute that things, whatever, external or internal, do not have any essential existence. To help this way of dependent origination, those who perceive it as contradictory or unestablished, how can they comprehend your system? For you, when one sees emptiness in terms of the meaning of dependent origination, then being devoid of intrinsic existence and possessing valid functions do not contradict. So, seeing the dependent origination as contradicting, a contradictory reason to establish that things have no intrinsic existence. When we say this, we say that things are merely existent, merely imputed or designated. So here the term mere does not preclude the object, and there's, beside the name there is no object. So things are do have existence by way of renown. And so to say that things exist, the reason is that the reason that is given is dependently originated. They say that things do not exist. So for those who say that things do not must have some intrinsic existence because they are dependent. For them, when you use the reasoning of dependent origination to prove the opposite, it's a contradictory reason. And then, with regard to the theistic religions, there is a God who creates the world and also beings. And they also, the non-Buddhist traditions believe or assert that there is a person apart from the psychophysical aggregates. And therefore, this is not dependently originated. And therefore, using dependent origination as a reason is unestablished. So how can they comprehend your system? So how that is so for you when one sees emptiness in terms of meaning, dependent origination, then being devoid of intrinsic existence, possessing valid functions, do not constitute. So your unique position taught in the Paramita Sutras, to understand, comprehend that precisely, when we say things are empty, it means that things have no essential independent existence. But they do exist by way of dependent origination. So whereas one sees the opposite, since there can be no function of an emptiness, nor emptiness in what has function, one falls into the dreadful abyss you maintain. Therefore, in your teaching, seeing dependent origination is hailed, that too, not as an utter non-existence, nor as an intrinsic existence. So things are not utterly non-existent, and nor they do have existence by way of their own characteristics. So if things were to have any existence from their own side, objectively, then the more we search for their identity, it should become clearer and clearer, but that's not the case. It's like seeing a mirage from afar. If there were water, the closer you get to the place, it should become more and more clear that there is water, but that's not the case. So the quantum physicists say that the matter, when you actually break them down into the subtle particles, there is nothing that they can actually find in the end. And so that's how we could understand that things cannot be found when you search for the designated objects. in themselves. Therefore, in your teaching, seeing dependent origination held that too, not as an utter non-existence. So when you search for the identity of the designated object in itself, in the object itself, you cannot find it. But that doesn't mean that the things do not exist at all, because they affect us. They cause us harm or benefit us. And therefore, it's undeniable that they exist. Therefore, asserting intrinsic existence in things is countered by reason. And therefore, as I quoted Tsongkhapa yesterday, that things can only exist by way of designation, and you should drive your mind towards that. And then the seventh Dalai Lama also says, in this crossroad of the six perceptions of the six objects and so forth, there is this hazy, deceptive appearance, but do not get caught up in the essential nature of things, but see things as being empty. So, since things do not exist independently, without depending on other factors, they are devoid of any, they are empty of any intrinsic existence. In one text by Nagarjuna says that if things were to arise intrinsically, if results arise independently, then you do not have to posit a cause in dependence on result. So even in conventional terms, we say that, oh, that's his nature, his or her nature. That means that we cannot change the person. So when we say this, we just leave the person alone. And then we can say the nature, gold has its own nature, and that cannot be changed. That nature of gold cannot be changed, and iron has other metals have their own. And iron has its own nature, and so forth. And so we usually use this term. The contingent is like a skyflower. Hence, there is nothing that is not dependent. If things exist through their essence, their dependence on cause and conditions for their existence is a contradiction. So things are dependent, therefore there is nothing intrinsically, inherently existing. Therefore, since no phenomena exists other than origination through dependence, no phenomena exists other than being devoid of intrinsic existence, you taught, because intrinsic nature cannot be negated. If phenomena possess some intrinsic nature, of course, the negative emotions and law of causality, karma, and so forth cannot be changed. Nirvana would become impossible, and elaborations could not be seized, you taught. Therefore, who could challenge you? You who proclaim with lions roar in the assembly of learned ones repeatedly that everything is utterly free of intrinsic nature. And so, dependent origination, which does away with both the extremes of nihilism and eternalism, was taught by Buddha, who proclaimed this with his lion's roar. Lions are said to be the king of jungle. And when they roar, the other animals are terrified. And so, in the assembly of the learned ones repeatedly, that everything is utterly free of intrinsic nature, that there is no intrinsic existence at all, and that all functions as this arising independence on that, what need is there to say that these two converge without conflict. It is not only that the dependent origination and emptiness are mutually not mutually exclusive, but that dependent origination can be used to reason out that things are empty of intrinsic nature, and vice versa. And so dependent origination can lead to the conviction of that things that they have no intrinsic existence, and that saying that things have no intrinsic existence also can give conviction to the dependent origination. So it is through the reason of dependent origination that one does not lean towards an extreme. In Jodin Lama Rinpoche's commentary to this text, so dependence, when you understand that things are dependent on others, then you are not doing away with that of the reality of things. And then origination shows that of the conventional worldly existence of things. And therefore, dependent origination is said to be the king of reasonings, to prove that things have no essential intrinsic existence. That you have declared this excellently is the reason, O Savior, of your being an unexcelled speaker. All of this is devoid of essence, and from this arises that effect. These two certainties complement each other with no contradiction at all. What is more amazing than this? What is more marvelous than this? If one praises you in this manner, this is real praise, otherwise not. Being enslaved by ignorance, those who fiercely oppose you, what is so astonishing about their being unable to bear the sound of no intrinsic existence? So this is talking about non-Buddhist traditions who do not assert that of dependent origination of things. So because of the feasibility of dependent origination in terms of causality and so forth, we can say that the things have no intrinsic existence. But having accepted dependent origination, the precious teacher of your speech, the precious treasure of your speech, then not tolerating the roar of emptiness, this I find amazing indeed, or intriguing. The door that leads to no intrinsic existence, this unexalted door to dependent origination, through its name alone, if one grasps at intrinsic existence, now this person who lacks the unrivaled entrance, well traveled by the noble ones. So we say that things, this is the nature of things, and dependent origination shows that things are have no real existence. And by what means should one guide them to the excellent path that pleases you? Intrinsic nature uncreated, and contingent dependent nature contingent and created. How can these two converge upon single basis without contradiction? Therefore, whatever origin is dependently, though primordially free of intrinsic existence, appears as if it does possess intrinsic existence. So you taught all this is to be illusion-like. So as I quoted the 400 verses, when you think about dependent origination, the reality or the suchness of dependent origination, it's scientific. It accords with the scientific assertion. And also it can be confirmed through, corroborated through your own experience. So through this very fact, I understand well the statement that to what you have taught, those opponents who challenge you cannot find faults that accord with reason. Why is this so? Because by declaring these chances for reification and denigration towards things seen and unseen are made most remote. In the Heart Sutra, we find mentioned that all the five aggregates are without any intrinsic existence. And then there's also the mention of form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form, and form too is not other than emptiness. So the five aggregates also are empty of intrinsic nature. When we talk about a person, we designate a person on the basis of their psychophysical aggregates. So the very basis for the designation of a person itself or themselves cannot be found when we actually search for their identity. And if that is the case, then it's quite evident that the person cannot have any intrinsic independent existence. And therefore, in the first turning of the wheel, during the teaching of the Four Noble Truths, the Buddha taught that there is selflessness of persons. And then, in the second turning, the Buddha mentions that things are devoid of any intrinsic existence, which doesn't mean that things are without existence, but that they are dependent. He uses the form as an example. And since form cannot be found, its identity cannot be found when we search for its identity in itself. Which doesn't mean that it does not exist at all, but that it means that the form has no independent intrinsic existence because it's dependent on other factors. Therefore, there is no form which is independently existence. And therefore, we can talk about form because of dependence on its causes and conditions and other factors. And so, the appearance of which is form, and then its emptiness. It's not that we are kind of stubbornly or forcing ourselves to say that form is there and then emptiness is there together. And so these two, the form and its emptiness, are said to be of this essentially one nature. But the form which affects us, when you actually analyze its identity, nature, you cannot find anything that you can pinpoint as being the form, and therefore it's empty of intrinsic existence, and therefore form is empty, and emptiness is also form. And therefore, in the Heart Sutra, there's mention of the fourfold emptiness. Form is empty, emptiness is form, emptiness is no other than form, and form too is no other than emptiness. So the last two phrases refer to the emptiness and form being of essentially one nature. So I'll stop here for a break, 15 minutes. Cautious. Oh, coffee. Big. Where's my mug here?
The question is, the questioner says he and all the Chinese people who have arrived here, they request His Holiness for his to live long and bless them to have the opportunity to receive teachings from him from lifetime to lifetime. So the question is, in the earlier days, His Holiness said that through TV and through other electronic means, they can receive teachings. His Holiness says, so they wanted to confirm that His Holiness says they can receive these transmissions. Main thing is, the main criteria is single-pointed faith. His Holiness says he used this reasoning during the time when the Buddha was alive. When the Buddha was alive, a woman who wanted to become or receive the ordination of bhikkhuni, but she couldn't go to the Buddha's place. So she was, however, ordained through what is called a
Later.
Through letter. For example, if a teaching recorded 2 years ago, after 2 years, if you read them again, you can still. His Holiness is, he thinks this is those students can receive. Tantric initiations are different, tantric teachings are different, but generally many of these things are okay. And next question is, in the Bodhicitta Lamrim teachings, before a disciple has obtained full understanding, is there any difference between implementing and understanding? His Holiness says, for example, like bodhicitta mind, before practicing that, you have to practice cherishing others' mind, the mind which cherishes others. And then also, similarly, in order to practice compassion, you have to understand suffering of sentient beings. Now, with regarding to this, first, before realizing the suffering of other sentient beings, you have to realize the suffering of your own self. Like the three kinds of sufferings: suffering of change, and suffering of composite phenomena. So you should, for example, when you need to think about, contemplate on the meaning of the three sufferings on your own self. So there's as it is said, renunciation and compassion. Two kinds of practices who are distinguished on the basis of when the mind is turned towards other sentient beings, your object is other sentient beings, it is compassion. When the object is taken as, yourself is taken as the object of such a mind, it is renunciation. So now, in order, for example, to seek liberation, you have to develop repulsion to the samsaric pleasures, fleeting pleasures of this life. And so repulsion to revulsion to this life, and then and also to the pleasures of future lives. And so in order to do that, one practices such things like impermanence of death, the sufferings of the lower realms like that, and the sufferings of the samsaric cycle. So, and through that one has to develop the fear for the sufferings of this cyclic existence. So that's how you practice through suffering, impermanence of death, then refuge, sufferings of the lower realms, sufferings of the higher realms, and then like that. So in order to do that, one has to first, it is very important we need teachers who can explain these things very comprehensively, and these masters should also have these three qualities of expertise, being an expert, a very good practitioner, and very kind and compassionate. Let alone the spiritual path. Even, for example, when we depend on teachers, even in worldly, like general matters, to learn something, we need a very good teacher. And it is very important for the teacher to explain very clearly and comprehensively, someone who is expert in his field. This is very important. So here we are not in Dharma practice. It's not just a general knowledge. It is about spiritual, it's a spiritual training. So the teacher is extremely important. And also, now one should realize that these are important because the ultimate goal, the liberation or enlightenment, these are very important. And therefore, gaining a thorough understanding of the Buddha's teaching, and as per the Lamrim teachings, is very important. Now, for example, Lamrim, there are three systems, three types of Lamrim. The shorter Lamrims, the intermediate Lamrims, and the great Lamrim teachings. Next question. His Holiness has taught on, said that he has practiced bodhicitta and emptiness for a long time. So when His Holiness is unhappy, how does he implement these practices? His Holiness says the best is just to have a good nap, and then you'll be all right. This is just a joke. His Holiness is, actually, you can tell this very easily. Through your own experience, you will learn. So for example, when those like unhappiness and things that makes us unhappy and stressed come from many different factors. But one can think well. One can look at it from different angles. You can see that it's not just like if you look at a situation from many different angles, like 3 dimensions, 4 dimensions, 6 dimensions, then you will see that this is not such a big problem. It may seem like it is a very bothersome situation. However, if you look at it from another angle, you will see that it is in fact a blessing in disguise. His Holiness says he also always remember this particular verse from Bodhisattva Charya by Shantideva, that if it is something that you can correct and modify, then why worry? If it is something that you cannot help, then why worry? Because it will not improve the situation at all. So, next question is, we have this opportunity to receive blessing and teachings from lamas, and so the answer is it is there are explanations that from Buddha's teachings, it is said that, like for example, in the Sutra Alankara, it is said that, like for example, faith in Buddha is sometimes arise mixed with self-grasping. So these things we need very intricate thinking and contemplation, like attachment mixed with faith, or like that. Generally speaking, things like faith and compassion are based on logic, whereas attachment, things like attachment and love, desire, these are based on unwholesome, negative perceptions. Next question. How do you know what logic's proof is there to prove that there is consciousness like that? This is in the primary logic primary study mind science syllabus. They are not explained that mind exists at different levels, but in higher practices, mind exists at many different levels, coarse, subtler, and extremely subtle. Like, for example, there's dream state, and then unconscious mental state. And the most subtle mental state is the one that arises at the time of death, when the heart has stopped beating. The blood circulation has also in the body has also through the brain has already stopped, and the brain has stopped functioning, and the brain has died. So the gross minds that are directly connected to the brain's functioning has stopped. However, we know through our experience and through some test that many of these people, we have cases like some people, most of them are meditators, clinically dead, but when they test through medical equipments, the person still is in meditation, because the person is still in this subtle mental state, clear light. As long as that the most subtle mental state is still there, the person's body continue to remain fresh, and the body doesn't start decaying. This is being tested by scientists together with us. And recently in Italy, there was I didn't mention this during the meeting conference on mind science, but during lunchtime I talked to them because this is related to Asian religion, this concept of past and future. And then, but during the mealtime, I mentioned to the scientists that there are many children who could remember their past lives. And like, for example, Patiala, from Patiala there was a child came forth who could really clearly remember their her past life. And then from Kanpur, another girl remembered her past life very clearly. And among Tibetan children also there are several cases who could cases of childs remembering their past life. And the scientists on their part were asking like, what about the fathers and the mothers elements, and not like perfect element of the father and the perfect element of the mother, like combining together into the mother's womb and becoming a fetus and conceiving the baby. So, and still the parents, the mother couldn't conceive the baby, even if the father's sperm and the mother's egg were perfect. So now the only explanation we have here is that from a Buddhist point of view, the child, a person could not enter the mother's womb. So now we can, when we consider these situations, we can understand, we can have an idea that mind exists at different levels. That some minds are grosser, some are subtle, and some are very subtle. For example, recently I met one child who remembered his past life and deliberately traveled all the way from Tibet to India, here Dharamsala, and then he went to South India, and then he even remembered his room. And then once he entered that room, he uncovered some kind of a sheet, and he said, my reading glasses are here. So the last questions. So and now the child has become quite big, and his owners asked him about whether he can remember his past life, and the child is saying he no longer remembers his past life. And myself also, when I was a little boy, it was said that I remembered my past life. There were signs that I remembered my past life, and then meditators were also saying that during their meditation, as the gross mind sort of subsides, and then the more subtle mind comes up, at that state of mind, these meditators suddenly start remembering their past lives. So in Vajrayana practice, we have at the last stage of the dissolution of the mind, there's what is called as vision, and and the clear light vision. And from the Dzogchen, there's similar explanation in Dzogchen also. And so these explanations that come in Tantra could explain how human beings are conceived and what happens when a person dies. Otherwise, there's no explanation to these phenomena. The next question is, before you become get understanding on emptiness, what is the benchmark on which you consider yourself as having gained knowledge on emptiness or not? His honest answer is that. So his honor says, primarily you have to, if you, just like his honor said during the earlier morning session, the first session, if you gain an understanding that emptiness is a different, another version of the meaning of interdependent origination, and these two are complementary to each other. When you have gained knowledge on emptiness, or when you have studies the 3-4 kinds of whatever you have learned, instead of saying this is what my Lama said, rather you should want to analyze the meaning of these teachings by oneself using the 4 kinds of reasonings or 4 kinds of analysis, and then familiarize with the point that one has, the conclusion that has come to, and so first try to gain a rough understanding of emptiness on the basis of what you have heard from your teachers and what is written in this text, and then fitting on that. That is the wisdom gained through learning. Like, for example, and then from the sphere, you can say, from the sphere of emptiness, you rise. So this empty I, and in this state, when you see, when you think about this concept of I, if your understanding is good at that point, from the sphere of emptiness, this you can get a feeling of I. And then you rise in the form of the deity, just by visualizing yourself as a deity. How will that be an antidote to self-grasping? So if that is the case, so therefore, even in deity yoga practice, first one has to meditate on the meaning of emptiness, and the illusory nature of the phenomena. One has to This is like we are right now talking about the generation stage in Tantra, and also in the lower tantric schools, we have what is called as the sign and signless meditations. So in Tantra, before you practice the deity yoga, the object that you take as your meditation must be a purified form of object, because this gross body is not the body that will go to eventually go to the state of enlightenment. Only a purified aggregate will go to the state of enlightenment. So at this point, for example, at the beginner's level stage, our practice is what is called as fabricated meditation. But this, so the fabricated, so even from the very beginning, the object, the beginning level stage, which is the generation stage, the object should be a purified object, and then practice deity yoga. So therefore, without the practice of emptiness of the object, there's no way your deity yoga practice will have any effect on the path. So therefore, studying the text is very, very important, without which one would not get the true meaning, get the point of the true way of doing the practice. Next question. Some people are saying that the Mahayana is not a pure form of Buddhism, and the real Buddhism is the Theravadan school, like that. So how do you distinguish whether something is genuine Buddhism and not genuine Buddhism? So as I explained earlier, since the Buddha taught the first wheel of Dharma in the Pali language, in public, generally, in a public form. So, however, the second wheel of Dharma on the Prajnaparamita Sutras was not given as a public teaching. And as a result, even at such very early stage, a controversy arose saying that, disputing that the second wheel of Dharma is not Mahayana, not true genuine Buddhism, not taught by the Buddha. And consequently, Asanga has in his treatises, he has put aside a separate section on proving that the second wheel of Dharma and the Mahayana scriptures are genuine Buddhism. And later on, by Vasu, and this is so those who dispute that the Mahayana is not Buddhist, genuine Buddhism, one of the reasons is that, for example, in Buddhism, why Buddhism declined in India was because at one time in India, the Vajrayana Buddhism became widespread, and so a few days ago, you were saying, someone was asking about this union practice. And if it is so great, then it's like saying, that means those who have disrobed and left monk have higher realizations than monks. Is that really true? But these who have left monks don't seem to have higher realizations. So, like Kung Tang Rinpoche said, many of us, many people, like they do like do such practices like read the scriptures and do some tantra practice to increase wealth and like that, mainly for the purpose of improving wealth, life, longevity in this life. And if one goes a little further, some even use tantra to eliminate enemies by engaging in black magic kind of esoteric practices. So the tantra is therefore, if not practiced properly, is extremely negative, can be extremely negative and very destructive. So therefore, in India, it is said that Buddhism, scholars are saying that Buddhism gradually declined in India due to the widespread degeneration of Buddhist Tantra. I saw this in a thesis written by an Indian scholar on this, a research thesis. So this is one reason. So and that's one of the reasons why those people, some people have reservations against Mahayana Buddhism. Now, a few years ago, I met a group of Pali tradition monks, and we discussed on the Four Noble Truths and the 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths like that, and the 37 paths to enlightenment like that. And I asked them, when you study on the 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths, how do you study them? You just depend on the transmission, or you analyze them? And they said they will just depend on they just rely on reading those transmissions. So Buddhism Buddhism today, the only tradition that sort of study Buddhism on the basis of logic and reasoning is only the Sanskrit tradition that is that is available in the Tibetan tradition. And so I have, for example, we have this, I have recently introduced this 17 great masters of Nalanda who have composed important treatises on Buddhist sciences. And now, with regard to this terminology, that Mahayana and Hinayana, I don't like that myself. And the two systems, the Theravadan tradition or the Hinayana tradition, criticize Mahayana as not Buddhism and it's fake Buddhism, whereas Mahayana tradition looks down on Hinayana tradition by saying they are lower school, and it's just a cause of friction within Buddhism, and I don't like that very much. However, in the for example, the Pali traditions, the Pali tradition scriptures are very important to both traditions because they are Buddhism. Because of the Pali tradition, we have Buddhism that looks like evolution, the progression of how evolution took place. First, the Buddhism, Lord Buddha laid out the Theravadan tradition, or the systems of the lesser tradition, the Pali tradition, or the Four Noble Truths like that. And then Mahayana built on that. And So in my case, if someone tells me that Mahayana is not a genuine teaching of the Buddha, then I would say back to this person, if that is the case, then I will have to say that Nagarjuna, Acharya Nagarjuna, is even greater, a greater scholar than Lord Buddha himself. Next question and last question. In one day, we practice like from Guru devotion to enlightenment. How do we do reflection on them? As per the Lamrim teachings, that's very, His Holiness says, that's very important. Of course, from the it is not easy to do get very clear reflection from the very beginning, but trying to have a sort of a flashback or a reflect on each point one by one every single day would definitely have an effect. For example, His Holiness himself says himself practice the Guru Yoga practice every day. For example, first he does the Guru Yoga several times during the day. During one time, he meditates on the 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths, like that. And during another Guru Yoga practice, he practiced on the Guru devotion and like the difficulty of attaining the perfect human basis, like that, which are based on the Lamrim tradition. Okay.
So where were we? And why? Because by teaching this, you render distant any chance to reify or deprecate unseen phenomena. I think His Holiness stopped at verse number 27 earlier, and by this we also properly may hold to the conclusion that no disputant on genuine grounds can. So in Bodhicitta Vivarana, the commentary on the awakening mind, Nagarjuna actually says that this is more marvelous than the marvelous things, and so forth. And so in that text, he goes through the different philosophical systems of non-Buddhist traditions and the Buddhist traditions, such as those of the Vaisheshika, Sankhya school, and so forth, refuting their positions, and also those of the Vaibhashikas, Chittamatra, and so forth. So then you may ask, did the text written by of Chittamatra text exist when Nagarjuna lived? Of course, the basic tenet of the Chittamatra philosophy existed in the sutras before the Chittamatra masters came. By this very path, a rising independence calls to see your speech is unsurpassed, give certainty, what else you taught is valid too. So we may not talk about ignorance as such, but when you talk about the reality of how things exist, and we could see that things cannot have any independent existence because they are dependently originated. You saw things as they are and taught that well. Your students' troubles, then will all recede away, since they will halt all defects at the root. Who turn away from what you taught may long perform austerities, yet they be fixated on the self, but summon faults repeatedly. Amazing when the wise perceive the difference between these two. Then from the very marrow shall they not have reverence for you? So I do recite this verse also when I do the practice of taking refuge in the triple gem. What need to mention many of your teachings, ascertaining just in general just the meaning of a part bestows a special joy. A confusion seized by mind, alas, though taking refuge for so long in that array of qualities, no part of one have I attained. So I find this mention here where Rinpoche says, in that array of quality, no part of one have I attained. So this is an exaggeration, because Rinpoche received teachings from Choje, his master Tundub Rinchen, before he came to central Tibet. And so he must have seen the qualities of taking refuge in the three jewels. So therefore, not part of a quality, not seeing any part of the quality of the Buddha is an exaggeration. But while life stream has not yet sung inside the mouth of death the Lord, I count it fortunate to have believed in you, however slight. Of course, before the Buddha came, there were many teachers, founding teachers, and also after him there came many founding teachers of different traditions. But the dependent origination is something that is unique to the teaching of the Buddha himself. Nobody has taught it. Of teaching, that of relativity. Of insight into that. So, of course, there are insights into the 5 sciences of learning and so forth, but that of the insight into the lack of true existence and things is the antidote to our grasping at true existence. In Pramanavartika, the root text, it says that the love and affection do not go diametrically opposed to the grasping at a self, and therefore they cannot counter and uproot it. These two, as in these rams, the great subduer, stand supreme. You saw this well, no others did. Your teachings start from and proceed to relativity. So relativity or dependence is for us to attain liberation and the omniscient state of Buddhahood. So all the vast teachings flow down into the teaching or converge to the teaching of the emptiness. And in the Heart Sutra, where it says there's no form, no sound, and so forth, they directly land at the that of the suchness or reality, emptiness. And with nirvana as the goal, no deed of yours was not for peace. Amazing that your teaching bring all those whose ears they reach to peace. So, who will not hold in esteem to the preservation of your words? So that in the teaching of the Buddha, we have the teachings which pertain to higher rebirth, and within the teachings pertaining to beings of small scope, there is the teaching turning the mind away from the preoccupation with the pleasures of this life and the next life and so forth. So I don't think practices leading to higher rebirth is unique to the teaching of the Buddha as such. Because even in the non-Buddhist traditions, they have practices of developing single-pointed concentration, leading to higher planes of existence, as the form and formless realms. And in the case of Christianity, Christianity teaches there's teaching about helping human beings and not harming them. For example, in the case of Mother Teresa, due to her altruistic practices, helping so many poor and destitute people, it's quite sure that she has created the causes for higher rebirth in her next life. And then on top of that, the teaching on selflessness, which teaches the antidote to grasping at true existence, which does away with the negative emotions arising from this ignorance, grasping at true existence, as well as the impressions left by them. And therefore, the unique teaching of the Buddha is that it leads not only to the higher rebirth in next life, but also to liberation and omniscient state. Amazing that your teaching bring all those whose ears they reach to peace. So who will not hold in esteem the preservation of your word? And when you analyze the teaching, all opposition it destroys. So there are qualms that are raised. For example, Nagarjuna, Master Nagarjuna, of course, the Buddha has laid down the basic teaching. So when the Buddha displayed miracles, it is also said that there were disputes between the non-Buddhist and the Buddhist, Buddha and the non-Buddhist teachers. So, of course, there are qualms raised in the Maitreya's text, but in the Madhyamaka text, the profound teachings of higher rebirth, such as avoiding 10 non-virtuous actions, then avoiding drinking alcohol and not harming others, and then also using deception to harm others, and then also wrong livelihood, abandoning, and then giving with respect to others, and then practice of love. So there are, in other words, 16 factors that are mentioned that leads one, that are the causes for higher rebirth in Ratnavali by Nagarjuna. So what I'm trying to say is that there are these kind of questions and qualms that are raised in texts, the discussions. For example, in the 24th chapter of Mula Madhyamaka Karika, when the Madhyamakas say that things have no inherent existence, then the oppositions say that you cannot have conventional things, the four noble truths and so forth, and the causality. And when Nagarjuna responds to these qualms, he mentions that the purpose of emptiness, the identity, and the meaning of emptiness. So he explains emptiness through these 3 points. Those who assert intrinsic existence, objective intrinsic existence in things, say that the emptiness, teaching emptiness is actually nihilism. And then Nagarjuna responds by saying that if all these are not devoid of, not empty of intrinsic existence, then you cannot posit conventionalities of things as well. And Master Bhaviveka, in his Tarkajvala, the Blaze of Reasoning, which is a commentary to his own text, Madhyamaka Hridaya, the essence of the middle way, which actually goes through the different philosophical systems and assertions that were extant in India at that time. So when you are able to understand the complementarity between dependent origination and emptiness, then you will be able to see, precisely you'll be able to see that how emptiness means. That when we say emptiness, that we are not rejecting conventionalities of things. And so there is a very precise answer to those who question, argue the Madhyamakas rejecting any intrinsic existence. And so all opposition is destroyed, it says in this text. No contradiction found within. And when you actually compare the teachings of the Buddha, the earlier and later ones, there's no contradiction. And then it yields all creatures dual aims. Because of the incontrovertibility of dependent origination, when you base your practices on the understanding of causality, law of causality, you create the causes for higher rebirth, and then the dependent in terms of how things are imputed, designated, that understanding creates the causes for liberation. So in Kamalashila's Tatu Samgraha Panjika, it mentions clearly, which I read, by understanding the law of causality and practicing, you doing your practices based on that, you create the causes for higher rebirth. And then by doing your practice on the basis of, based on understanding of the dependent nature of things, you create the dependent nature or the suchness of things, you create the causes for liberation. My pleasure in this system grows. For countless ages, for its sake, you gave away repeatedly at times your body or your life, the ones you loved, a mass of wealth. And when you saw its qualities, this doctrine drew your heart as does a hook a fish. Sad fate for me, not hearing it from you yourself. So this is saying that the Tsongkhapa had no fortune, was not fortunate enough to receive the teaching directly from the Buddha on dependent origination. In virtue of this sorrow's strength, just like a mother's mind that is intent upon a darling child, may my mind never deviate. And dwelling on your speech, I think of you, O teacher, blazing with the glories of the signs and marks and hallowed by a radiant light. So though not having received the direct teaching directly from the Buddha by seeing him, yet his teachings, the vast and the profound, the innumerable teachings that he has given, which we can actually, we have access and practice. So even the Buddha even if he were to come today, there is no greater teaching that he may give us. Although we may not have met with Master Nagarjuna, his writings are. We have access to his writings, such as Mula Madhyamaka Karika. We can read and it, and also the commentaries to it. And also the writings of other masters like Dignaka and Dharamsala and so forth, who were masters of logic and epistemology. And others, I mean, we may not have seen them in person, but we have access to their writings today. So we do the seven-limb practice on a daily basis, and within which there is requesting the Buddhas to turn the wheel of Dharma, give teaching. So if we were to have some vision, pure vision of Master Nagarjuna and others, and ask them to turn the wheel of Dharma, they may say, oh, I have already, he may say, I have already given teachings, you are not actually studying them. So it's quite strange, isn't it? Not studying what they have written, but then still requesting them to give us teaching. So, of course, unless you lack time and also the energy to study, your intellect to study them. But regarding myself also, who have reached the age 82 and above, I mean, whenever I have spare time, I still study these texts written by these great masters. In your sweet voice discoursing thus and thus, as moon rays fever's pangs, O sage, your likeness brings relief in just appearing to my mind. So marvelous and excellent a system this, yet those who had no mastery were, like Belvajar, in every which way tangled up. And so the great masters of the past have written so many different texts. For example, Mahabhaviveka was a follower of the Madhyamaka tradition, follower of Nagarjuna, and he was a great logician. When it comes to understanding this subtle object to be negated in establishing emptiness, and he was not up to the measure, and you can see the profundity of how Chandrakirti has made that clear to us. Otherwise, when you read one Indian classic text, you may find that to be true, and then you read another one, you find that also to be true, and you're confused. And therefore, we need to actually read the varieties of texts to gain conviction in the real import of the intention. So we need to read. So first, read texts. If we read texts written by masters like Chandrakirti, who have the understanding of all the Sutra and Tantra, the imports of them, and also on the other hand, if you only read texts written by masters who have some knowledge only of the specific teachings, I mean, there are differences, and therefore we can actually see the difference in the writings of these different masters. No mastery were like Belvajar in every which way tangled up. I recognize this plight, and so with great endeavor following the masters. For the meaning you intended searched repeatedly. I studied many texts, our own and those of others, at this time. My mind was yet repeatedly all baffled in a net of doubts. So when I read all these texts and analyzed them, those which are supported by the ultimate reasoning and which actually opposes and counter the clinging to the true existence in things. I studied many texts, and those that, and my mind was repeatedly all baffled in a net of doubts. When through the Lama's kindness I beheld the grove of all texts of Nagarjuna foretold to show just how your highest vehicle shunned the extremes of being and non-being both, made bloom by white light garlands of the speech of glorious moon, regarding the referring to Chandrakirti, and regarding Chandrakirti's writings like Madhyamaka Avatara and Clear Words, whose sphere waxed full of stainless wisdom sails. And then Master Tsongkhapa also, with the help of Lama Umapa and so forth, received teaching from Manjushri. Unchecked, the heaven of sacred speech dispels the heart's extremist gloom. So Jetsun Rendawa, who was also one of the teachers of Master Tsongkhapa, was someone who was very fond of the Madhyamaka system of philosophy. He wrote an explanation of and Kunu Lama Tenzin Gyatso was fond of that commentary. And it says that Rendawa, during the time of Rendawa, there was this saying that whatever you do, sitting, walking, sleeping, and so forth, you think of Madhyamaka, middle way philosophy all the time. So he was very fond of Madhyamaka philosophy, Rendawa. Unchecked, whose fear waxed full of stainless wisdom sails, unchecked, the heaven of sacred speech dispels the heart's extremist gloom, outshines the stars of erring talk. Oh, then my mind arrived at rest. Of all the deed of speech was best. As we come across earlier, O wondrous teacher, and so forth, I take refuge in you. This also has the same meaning. Of all deeds, the deed of speech was best. Of that, of this, and so. With this your reason, learned ones remember the enlightened ones. Enlightened one. And then next verse shows the author. As a follower of this teacher I went forth, and not ill-versed in the subduous speech, I strove in yoga practice as a monk. Such my devotion for that mighty seer. So I recite this text, the teaching for dependent relativity. Especially when I'm having difficulty sleeping, I sit on my bed and then recite this text, and then when I feel relaxed, I go to bed. A follower of this teacher went forth, and not ill-versed in the subduous speech. I strove in yoga practice as a monk. Such my devotion for that mighty seer, the kindness of the Lama, brought me to the foremost teacher's teaching. So too, I this virtue dedicate as cause for all being, cared for by a holy spiritual friend, our helper's teaching. Till the world's end, be not shaken by the wind of evil thoughts, and be it ever full with those who find trust in the teacher, knowing that what he taught, though life or body be the cost, may my mountain, may we maintain no moment's faltering, all our birds dependently arising suchness, this pure doctrine that the sage made manifest, the best of guides through countless trials, stress this to be this essence, and let day and night pass in examining whatever ways by which what he achieved can be increased, who strive this way with pure and high resolve, you, Brahma, Indra, worldly guidance and protector Mahakala, and the like, without distraction always lend your aid. The Mahakala was a protector of Master Nagarjuna. There's a praise written by Nagarjuna on him as well. The Dhamma protector Mahakala. The essence of true eloquence, praise to the Supreme Victor Buddha, great friend without acquaintance to all the world, foremost teacher for teaching profound dependent relativity, was composed by Venerable Chandrakirti Bhikshu, who has heard many teachings, and at Hlading, also called Nambargeva Ling, at the hermitage of Lhajul, beneath the gods of Odegungel, mighty among the snowy peaks of the land of snows. The scribe was Namkapel. So we have completed the first chapter of Madhyamaka Avatara, and now we are on the second chapter. So the second ground is called the ground where of the perfection of morality. So here, because he possesses perfect discipline, he abandons the stains of faulty ethics, even in dreams. Because deeds of body, speech, and mind are pure, he accumulates the tenfold aspects of sacred path. And then the second verse. dwelling on the purity of his own discipline is not pure discipline. So from the point of view of the philosophical view, if you still hold on to the morality that you keep as having some intrinsic objective existence, just as it appears, from that point of view, your discipline or ethics is not pure. Thus, in regard to its three aspects, at all times he is perfectly free of the engagement of dualistic mind. And so the method aspects of the practice, if they are complemented by the wisdom as well, with regard to, whereby you see these method aspects of the practice as like illusion, within that understanding of illusion-like things, the method aspects, without losing that perception, having comforts through generosity, yet miserable. This arises from breaking the limb of discipline, just as it was taught in the first bodhicitta, the first chapter. Although through giving, the practice of generosity that was taught there, you may gain wealth and so forth, yet you may be born in animal realm, whereby you still may be wealthy, such as the Nagas, and also some hungry ghosts are said to be rich. So this arises from breaking the limb of discipline, having exhausted all your investments. Later, these will not yield much comfort. And therefore, on top of the generosity, practice of generosity, it's important also to observe discipline and ethics well, not only through generosity, but also on the basis of ethics, you will attain higher rebirth. Dwelling independently in an agreeable place, one may still not be able to stay, falling into the abyss and losing one's independence. How will one get out later on? So right now, when we have the 18 leisures and endowments in this human life, we need to practice the ethics very seriously, because we have the opportunity to do so in this life. For this reason, having spoken of generosity, the Buddha spoke of discipline. So after teaching on generosity, the Buddha taught discipline so that you will create the causes for higher rebirth, where you are able to practice further. Qualities grown in the pasture of discipline yield unending fruits of enjoyment. Ordinary individuals' speech born, those certainly possessing an enlightenment for themselves, and bodhisattvas all attain that certain excellence and higher rebirth solely from discipline. So, of the three disciplines, three trainings, that of the higher rebirth comes through that of the discipline. And the other two trainings are based on the discipline, that of the training of discipline, and also the higher rebirths and so on come from discipline. Just as a corpse and the ocean, and auspiciousness and misfortune cannot coexist, so a great sovereign applying himself to discipline cannot live with carelessness. And so within the understanding that things are like illusion, you should practice and observe your ethics. Who abandons what is abandoned, and for whom discipline with these 3 points of reference is taught to be ordinary paramita. Absence of clinging to these three transcendent. The moon-like bodhisattva, while non-worldly, is the glory of this world, like the radiance of the autumn moon, the stainless. His stainlessness soothes the anguish of sentient beings. Then the next chapter, chapter 3, shows that of the practice of patience. So, although he is innocent, aggressive individuals may carve from his flesh and bone, slowly measure by measure, yet such dissection merely makes his patience grow. So this is a very powerful statement in the practice of patience. So there are friends of mine who do practice equaling and exchanging self and others, and also the practice of patience. And when they hear or people despising me, the Dalai Lama, or harming the Dharma, they tell me that they don't feel angry at those people, but feel compassionate to them. And so I too do not have any grudge towards such people who criticize me. So slowly, measure by measure, in such dissection may. So at one time, there are some cities in Italy who hoist the Tibetan flags during the 10th March, an uprising day. And one time I was with them, and on the final day, in the morning, there were 6 or 7 mayors of these cities. And we met, we had a media press conference, and one of the media persons told me that the Chinese authorities have said that the Dalai Lama is a demon. So what, any comment? He asked me, and I actually told him, yes, I am a demon with horns, and I acted with my hands on forming a horn on my head. So I don't really mind when people say such things. I do my best to practice equaling and exchanging self and others, and I do also practice patience based on the 6th chapter of Bodhisattva Charyavatara by Shantideva. So recently, when I was in Italy, when I visited several places there, we had interfaith meeting. And so there was one Christian priest who told me that some Chinese people from Chinese mission may have come to some meeting or something there, and they came to him and told him that he should not meet with the Dalai Lama because he was bad, and Dalai Lama is a bad person. And he is a splittist. And there was also one Chinese Buddhist with them. And this priest asked, are you not a Buddhist? And then he said, yes, I am a Buddhist, but Dalai Lama is not a Buddhist. So these are just the object of laugh at. And so I don't really feel anything bad. So although his innocent, aggressive individuals may carve from his flesh and bone, slowly, measure by measure, yet such dissection merely makes his patience grow. Because for the Bodhisattva who sees selflessness, victim, perpetrator, moment, manner, and purpose are all seen as a reflection, he attains patience. So if you don't understand it well, of course, you may say that with the wisdom you understand that the sentient beings who are suffering are like illusion. The suffering itself also is like illusion. I mean, you may gonna have misunderstanding. Therefore, how to practice patience may be misunderstood. Because when you become impatient, the patience, the opposite of patience is that of anger, and anger arises because of the grasping its true existence. It goes with it. So while you may say that you are developing the wisdom, realizing the reality of things, you may ignore the method aspect of the practice and vice versa. So that you should always be able to bring them together. If you take revenge upon having been harmed, how can this reverse the harm done? Accordingly, revenge is useless for this life. So when someone harms you, because of that, if you try to bear some grudge and dissent, saying that, oh, that person did something bad to me, criticized me, and did things that are inappropriate to me. I mean, these will not reverse the harm and so forth done to you, criticism that was directed towards you. So will that harm go away? So when someone harms you, and if you try to hold grudge, and it will not go away. Not only that, but that harm, accordingly, its revenge is, or dissent is useless for this life and counterproductive with regard to the next life. And so if you try to meet harm with harm as a response, I mean, from life after life, you will not be free from that kind of suffering. The result of earlier non-virtuous actions is regarded as having been called purification by the Buddha, yet you harm the other. The suffering, that anger, from that anger is what you now proceed to sow. So because of your harming others, you actually have created the cause for others to harm you. And for example, in the previous life, you have harmed somebody, and in this life, you're harmed by those people. And therefore, there's no reason why you should feel angry at the person. If you really want to feel angry, you should be angry at the anger of that other person, because that is the final cause of the person harming you. So is what you now proceed to sow. So when you try to respond with harm, for the harm that was done to you, with anger, you will continuously suffer. You are creating cause for continuously suffer. Therefore, the person who harms you should be seen as your spiritual teacher, as it is mentioned in Bodhisattva Charya Avatara by Shantideva. So because there is some perpetrator, I mean, this person, the enemy who harms you, is the test of your practice of equaling and exchanging self and others. So we cannot practice patience in relation to the Buddha or Master Nagarjuna and so forth. So there's no practice of patience in connection with them. And this enemy is giving us the opportunity to practice patience. And we need to practice patience, don't we? And the opportunity for that is actually offered by this enemy who is harming us. And therefore, this enemy should be seen as your spiritual teacher. Because getting angry at Bodhisattva or the child of victorious ones, 100 kalpas, virtue accumulated through generosity and discipline or ethics. So the accumulation of merit through these practices of generosity and discipline is destroyed in an instant. So such wholesome aspects of your practice coming through these practices is destroyed in an instant with anger. So those wholesome practices that you have created through the help of your wisdom realizing suchness may be difficult to be destroyed by such anger. So therefore, an evil worse than anger does not exist. And so anger actually creates causes for a bad rebirth, to have a bad feature. And even if that's not the case, in this life, you will not have an impartial state of mind, and you will be biased, and you cannot use your intelligence properly, and your face looks really horrible. So even in this life, as Bodhisattva Charyavatara says, So even your face becomes something that's terrible, uncomfortable to see. So if you have a friend, and when you are angry, the friend actually tries to keep distance from you, don't they? Whereas if you are really smiling all the time, happy, then the friends come around you. So this is not talking about religion, it's our own life experience. It creates an ugly body and leads to the unholy. Robbed of discriminating mind, impatience will hurl you into the lower realms. So many of the problems in the world are caused when the leaders and so forth have disturbed mind, when they are fully disturbed. So such a person, although maybe disturbed, have an unpeaceful, disturbed mind today, next day will be calm, maybe calm. And you'll say, oh, this person has now is calm. Patience remedies the above and developed qualities. Through patience, you'll be beautiful, adored by holy beings, skillful in discerning right and wrong, and thereafter born as a human. And, or God, you'll exhaust evil. Ordinary individuals and bodhisattvas, knowing their defects and qualities of anger and patience, abandon impatience and rely on patience as praised by superiors, dedicating the perfect enlightenment, Buddhahood. With threefold reference, its ordinary paramita, if non-referential, the Buddha taught this to be transcendent paramita. On this bhumi, the Bodhisattva attains samadhi and foreknowledge, exhausting entirely desire and anger, and is always able to overcome this world's gross attachments. And so these three practices of generosity, ethics, and patience, so forth refers to ethics and patience. The Sukha advocated for householders. These, known as the accumulation of merit, are seed for the body containing the Buddha's form. The Bodhisattva, who is the radiance of the sun, first completely dispels his own darkness. He then wishes to dispel the darkness of sentient beings. On this bhumi, though very sharp, he knows no aggression. Then the next chapter, all qualities depend on diligence. Course of the two accumulations of merit and wisdom. So all the wholesome qualities that you develop comes through diligence. So diligence is defined as that state of mind which takes delight in wholesome practices. Blazing with intelligence, the fourth bhumi is known as radiant. Here is the Bodhisattva's radiance. From thoroughly meditating on the aspects of Buddhahood, shines brighter than copper. Belief in self and its effects are exhausted. So belief in self refers to the view of transitory collection, perishable collections, which is a form of grasping at a true self-existence of a self. And this is the fourth chapter. So all the practices, the 337 practices and so forth, will prosper. All the demons of self-importance cannot defeat the Bodhisattva on the bhumi, difficult to overcome. Meditation is excellent. Mind is good. The nature of truth thoroughly realized. Thus he becomes skillful. So by understanding the Four Noble Truths, the nature of truth thoroughly realized, thus he becomes skillful. Then I'll just begin reading from the beginning of the 6th chapter. In advancing, his mind dwells in meditation. Advancing towards the Dharma of perfect Buddhahood, seeing the suchness of dependent arising, the Bodhisattva dwells in wisdom, thereby reaching cessation. As an entire crowd of blind people can easily be led to their desired destination by a seeing individual, likewise intelligence can lead the blind qualities to victory. The one who realized the profound Dharma, this bhumi, through the scriptures as well as through reasoning, was Arya Nagarjuna. So his writings, such as the Sutra Samuchaya, the compendium or the compilation of the quotations from Sutra, and also Mula Madhyamaka Karika and other collections of reasoning written by Master Nagarjuna, based on his scriptural tradition, I shall explain this tradition as it exists today. So what kind of person could be taught emptiness is taught next. Even an ordinary being may, when hearing of emptiness, repeatedly feel immense joy surging within, bringing forth tears that moisten his eyes and making the hairs on his body quiver. He has the seed of mind for perfect enlightenment and is perfect recipient for instruction. He must be taught the ultimate truth, so the resultant qualities will arise. Applying at all times perfect discipline, he comes to abide therein, giving with generosity, adhering to compassion and meditating patience. He completely dedicates his virtue to being's enlightenment. And then the next verse also was read. And so, by understanding the meaning of emptiness, as I've explained, when you really give thought to this, Master Nagarjuna's writings that we have the access to, and when should I leave an imprint on such a profound teaching, if not now, you should think. At the end of this text, Master Chandrakirti says, so by understanding that of emptiness, it should actually complement your practice of compassion and so forth, the method aspects of the practice as well. So I'll stop. So, devoted to the perfect bodhisattva, skilled in the ways of the profound and the vast, he will gradually attain the bhumi of extremely joyful. Therefore, those aspiring thus should hear of this path. So I'll stop here. So from the verse number 8 and so forth, it talks about emptiness. And then tomorrow I will do the bodhisattva ceremony for bodhisattva bodhicitta, and also before that give the layperson's vows. In connection with the blessing. And so the organizers who have requested this teaching asked me to continue the teaching if I'm not able to finish this time. So I'll do that. So I'll go through the teaching on refuting the four extremes and so forth. Tenze punu shindu tenpa yurin nebe tra shishu.